And we are recording. So, thank you once again for coming to this Saturday morning. I don't know if I call it a class or it's just me talking and kind of sharing my ideas about this. And I'm gonna continue with what I left it on last week with the walk cycle. Um, and I'm gonna attempt to fill all these empty frames with in-betweens so we get like a nice smooth animation on this. So in-betweening in Quill is quite difficult because we don't have automatic in-betweening for shapes that are changing shape or things that are transforming or bending or uh, you can only automatic in between things that are translating or rotating with the transform keys, right? So I'm sure you guys know all of this, but we can just do a quick example of the transform keys. Okay. Is this an empty layer? Yes. Transform keys, as you guys know, are applicable to a layer span. The span is basically this area here, the color layer that represents the layer in time. So if this area is white, means the layer is invisible, and if the layer starts with the color, the layer becomes visible, right? And we can change that by grabbing the beginning of the span here, which is marked as a bracket symbol, right? So anyway, if we add keyframes to this span by using this button right here, it works very similar to After Effects, where you add these keyframes, right? And then in order to change the position of this, you have to make this layer the transform object, right? So click on that button here. So using the grab button, we can transform that layer into different positions in time. So now we see this circle moving into different places in time, right? Thanks to these keyframes that we added. So at the moment, there's no in-betweens between these poses, but we can turn on the in-betweens by selecting all the keys right here. They become blue. And then here we have the different options of transitions or different interpolation options, right? So we can choose linear interpolation. So that will give us in-betweens between this and this, this and this, right? Very simple. And this only works for transformation, like a movement, rotation, or scale. If I am to distort, if I want to distort this circle and I want to animate that, I cannot do that. I cannot do an animation of that distortion, right? If I want to do an animation of that distortion, of that transformation of the shape, I need to duplicate the geometry and create different keyframes, right? Different drawings. I mean, just by duplicating that and then changing that a little bit, so that way I can animate that distortion. But there's no automatic in betweening for that. So I think that's all super clear, right? Let's just delete this. Go back to our
Yeah, I think
walk
the way
cycle.
you explained it with stop motion, it was good, right? It's more like stop motion versus Maya.
Exactly. So the way I'm animating this right now is gonna be like a stop motion. I'm gonna create different keyframe, different drawings. Uh, so I called each one of those blue boxes drawing, because I consider this a drawing, like with the vectors that I created, the geometry, and the wide areas. This area here is, I call that frames. So each one of these boxes is frames. The boxes with the color is a drawing that I created. So at the moment this is empty. So this is holding the frame. The drawing is holding it for 3 more frames, but I'm gonna add an in between in the middle. So to do that, I'm just gonna duplicate by using the shortcut with the left trigger and up on the joystick on the left hand side. So that creates a duplicate of frame number 1. So frame number 3 is exactly like number 1 right now. So in order to do my in between, I have to change the duplicate so it's not exactly the same. And in this case, I'm just gonna rotate that leg a little bit so it's right in the middle of the 2 positions. And also the body needs to be changing, right? So thanks to the onion skinning, I can see the previous position, and the blue represents the next position, right? So thanks to that, I'm able to more or less guess the in-between position on that body here, for example. And thanks to the gimbals, I'm able to be really precise about it and kind of like try to estimate what's that in-between position, right? In
Talking
both.
about the gimbal, the gimbal visibility can be controlled with the right thumbstick press. If you
Oh
press
yeah.
the right thumbstick as a button, you can hide and show the gimbal.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like a trick is, you saw what Daniel did, is when you grab the center of the gimbal with the index finger trigger, not with the middle finger, with the index finger trigger, then you can move it to where you want. So you can basically, if you want to rotate over like the hip joint or something, you can just move the gimbal up to that position, grabbing the center, just like what Daniel is doing right now, and then you can rotate through that. So this is like super useful. To reset the gimbal to what it was before, you just select the leg again and we'll jump back to where it was, to the center of the bounding box. Just a
Yeah,
little.
Quill by default will make a center out of your selection. So if this is my selection, Quill doesn't know where I want to rotate it, right? But automatically thinks, oh, this is the center of your selection. I'm gonna put the gimbal right here, right? So if I select both legs at the same time, it will find the center of that selection and will put the gimbal right there. So if, like Goro said, if I want to change that, there's a difference between using your grab button, which is in your middle finger, and the difference is with your index finger on your trigger. You click on that little ball in the center, and you can change that axis where the selection that you want it to rotate from. And
And you can also grab the axis arrows with the index finger to move it along a certain axis. So this
oh
is
yeah,
also helpful if you do cities and stuff like that. Then you can use that to populate. Like then you know that you're like parallel to the ground and stuff like that. So that's like really powerful. One thing to note is if you are in layer transform mode, the gimbal position will be remembered. So that's when you guys, that's not what Daniel is covering here, but if you end up animating with transform keyframes versus like frame by frame animation, then a good thing to note is that if the layer transform gimbal is permanent, so you can position the gimbal there, like Daniel did right now at the hip, and on that layer, the gimbal will stay on the hip. And what Daniel is doing here is only on, the gimbal on selections for frame by frame
yeah.
animation.
There's a difference between geometry selection gimbal or uh, this
Layer.
gimbal here, which is your when you move that, you're moving the whole layer
Yeah, it's like the layer transform gimbal.
instead of moving just a selection. So here, um, the foot is gonna plant on the ground, right? But I don't want that planting to be right in the middle. in this case. I want this foot to plant on the ground much faster. I want it to really be flat on the ground. So it's going to be a slightly different timing than the rest of the leg. And that's really important to just to make some stuff in your animation have different timings. So not everything has exactly the same um, timing, right? I mean, in a walk cycle, the general rule is everything is kind of very even and it has a cadence to it, like a rhythm. So there are only a couple of things that kind of break that rhythm, and in this case, is this: the foot planting needs to be fast. I even say I'm gonna make it in 1 frame. So let me finish this in between first, and then we'll go into frame number 2. So now I'm doing frame number 3, and let's keep in between on this. So here I'm gonna just go piece by piece instead of going so. And when I'm doing this, I'm trying to get that really middle pose, and the same for this foot here. I'm gonna try to get those toes still on the ground, and making sure the ground is moving in that direction, right? So making sure that there's progress on that foot moving, right? Okay, and I'm in between the body too, right? So I think I'm done with this one. And let's go to do number 2. Number 2, again, I'm gonna duplicate number 1 just by doing that same shortcut, duplicate frame. And let's just do, again, just right in the middle there. It looks good from the front. And then here, I'm gonna go really drastic and just really put that foot on the ground quickly. But the toes, they will be the last thing to touch the ground. So I'm gonna have the toes overlap a little bit, and then I'll talk about overlap in action later. So that way we have the toes reach the ground a little bit later after the heel. So the heel is the first to touch the ground, then the foot base, and then the toes are still up, and then here we have the whole foot on the ground, the whole foot on the ground. So keep going with frame number 2. And this is very much like traditional animation in stop motion. We just manually calculating those in betweens. But this will give us a more traditional animation feeling to our Quill stuff, even though it takes a bit more work than it would normally. I mean, we could do this also with transform keys, but it would look really rigid because I don't have the opportunity to really reshape or modify the shape of each part. And with this, I have this opportunity to kind of change the shape of things. Here, the body's going down, so I want the socket of the hips to go down as well. Okay, so we have these couple of frames. Let me see. There's a bit of a. So I'm trying to make sure that parts are not moving independently. So I was looking at the legs, and they were moving forward a little bit faster than the butt. So I want the hips and the legs to change the height at the same time. So make sure that all the body parts are kind of together, moving at the same time, right? And let's do frame number 4. Actually, maybe it's a good idea to in between this first, because the body's going down here a little bit, and it's gonna go to the side a little bit too. And because the body's moving, it's carrying the legs with it. And here we having this foot is getting off the ground. And let's go a little distortion there to make sure that the toes are the last thing to leave the ground right there. All right, so let's keep going. And then I have a tendency to in between first the very middle one, and then do this one first, and then do this one, and then do this one. That's kind of the method that works best. Um, so on the body here, what is it doing? It's going a little to the side. So let's just carry all the stuff together, the body and the top part of the leg. And here the spacing is going to be really, really even. We are in the middle of the motion, so everything is not, there's no like slow downs or accelerations and things like that. So here sometimes I modify the main keyframes a little bit to make sure that they work well with the in-betweens that I'm doing. And that happens a lot also in traditional animation and hand drawn. You end up, when you're working on your in-betweens, you end up changing slightly your keyframes as well. So it's a little hard to, sometimes it's easy to get confused because keyframes and in-betweens are the same color exactly. So, but it's good to kind of remember the numbers, right? I know that 5 is, uh, so 3 was in between. Yeah, 5 is the keyframe. 7 is the in between. So I'm gonna make 6. Oh, hang on. Oh yeah, I have to do six right there. Sometimes it's very quick to do. It's almost no difference. And also you could go a little faster if you use grab tool, and you can use it almost as a rig, right? So if I select the whole leg and I put the center on the foot and the edge of this circle, I put it on the pivot point of the leg, right? More or less. And then when I move it, it kind of feels like I have a rig right there. So that's another quick way to articulate a character in Quill that really helps a lot in order to do this in betweens of legs or arms and stuff, you know. And it's cool because you can.
That's a great usage of that. I had not thought of that before.
It can distort the mesh sometimes though. So you
Yeah,
have to be careful.
you gotta use it carefully, but for these kind of things is very useful because I can manage to keep that pivot here on the leg, and I'm moving the foot, so it kind of feels like I have a rig right there, inverse kinematics.
The thing is also, like you have to always remember this is frame by frame, so you can like at any time bring a fresh leg in. So I
Exactly.
wouldn't worry too much about like, oh, it
If it
might be
breaks,
distorted.
yeah.
You can just delete that leg and just paste the new leg in there and do it again. So that's the beauty of it, that it's actually fairly non-destructive unless you have like a super long dense animation and you did like a grab tool animation for a time, then it might be much more difficult to fix. But if you do controlled frame by frame animation like Danielle is doing and it deformed too much, you just grab a leg from a different frame. Or I think, Daniel, what you do sometimes, you have a fresh character somewhere up in the skies, right, where you can just grab like limbs and stuff that you need.
Yeah, and I can talk about that right now if you want. That's a good point to bring up.
Sure.
Hang on a second. I'm not too happy with this.
Looked like he was kind of moonwalking.
Oh yeah, if I go backward.
Faith, you're T-painting again.
So there's a couple of spacing issues that I'm seeing
Oh
here.
no.
Let me just fix this. There's a couple of moments where the pivot of the leg kind of stays a little too still. So I'm just gonna fix that quickly. So make sure that there's a huge jump here in the spacing. But that's okay. Yeah, let's talk about libraries, right? Like Gora was saying, yes, you can, because we're doing frame by frame and this is not automatic interpolation at all. We can anytime, let's say I got this new in between, I can just get rid of this leg and bring a new one in case I need to, right? Or if I'm distorting too much something and I break it, and I'm like, oh no, and I need to do a clean new in between, this geometry won't be good for me. So a good idea is to always keep a duplicate on that geometry. Imagine that you spend a lot of time creating these legs beautiful with a lot of details and all that stuff, right? And when you distort it with grab tool, it can be a little destructive, and like I say, it will be hard to reuse again and distort it again back to a normal shape, right? So that's why it's important to do this technique of just duplicating this, put it somewhere in the air, right? And if you press that button right here, copy selection 12 frames, these legs will always be here. So if I wanna start fresh with a new leg here, I can just delete this leg and grab a fresh leg over there and use it if I need to, without distortion, without everything's clean. So that's a thing too that I used a lot especially in the remedy on these big action moments. I had the which I want to show you, what guys, someday. I want to show you how I did that. Yeah, I had a bunch of body parts of the mom character spread around, so I would just grab it and just duplicate it and put it into place, and and create new keyframes that way. So let's keep on going for this. And this grab tool technique that I'm doing right now only works for like small, tiny movements. I wouldn't recommend to do it for a big change in the. And also just bear in mind that it's gonna distort the geometry is gonna create a little bit of. But it really works for things like that, like a simulation of a IK, right? And here, the body is supposed to go up. So let's go up a little bit. Okay, and this pivot point, I don't want it to. So I'm gonna go a little faster now. And if you have questions, it's a good time to answer them now.
Do you find that you get smoother animation when you use the grab tool like that instead of like doing pose to pose for smaller movement?
Using the grab tool like that kind of assures you that you're keeping the pivot of the leg in the right place. So that I think that it's really helpful for limbs, all arms and legs. I'm gonna fix this quickly, guys, because I'm a little OCD and I need
Meanwhile, I can just reply to Faith's question. So basically, if you want to do like super subtle animation, like really subtle head movements and stuff, you might want to do transform keyframes instead. Because what the frame by frame does, it respects the global timeline frame rate. So if you usually animate at 24 frames per second, you're limited to that frame rate. So it will always look a little bit choppier than transform keyframes, because transform keyframes go by the maximum frame rate of your headset. So if you use a Rift, you get 90 frames per second of interpolation. And if you use the Quest, you get 72 frames of interpolation, which is why transform keyframes look super smooth compared to frame by frame animation. But really depends, like you can make frame by frame really smooth too, but you don't want to end up animating 90 frames per second. That would
you could change this instead of 24.
But that means a lot more work.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be I would suggest to use 24 frames per second, because that's like a good, like all the traditional animators know the timing by heart on a 24 4 frames per second base. And most of the animation tutorials and stuff base it on that, or on twos, like 12 frames per second. So it really depends. But like for subtle animation, like I don't know if you've seen the Valentine's piece that I did with the character sitting in the train car. That one is that one is like all transform keyframes, because like wobbling heads and stuff like that, wobble heads, that's gonna be a nightmare to animate with like frame by frame, because it's gonna be super choppy. So but then again, like for what Daniel is doing, you have maximum control with frame by frame, and you could generate the same thing with transform keyframes and stepped curves, but then you won't be able to deform the geometry. But what I do sometimes, and what's also a cool technique, is to mix those two techniques. So you do the broad movements or the subtle movements with transform keyframes, and on top of that, you just create like frame by frame animation within that layer that is transform keyframes. So you can actually merge those two techniques, and which is kind of like a new thing, right? That doesn't really exist in Maya and stuff like that. But that way you can achieve like really cool effects. For example, what I did in my dog running piece, it's like a dog running on the road. I redid the road with just 2 transform keyframes, and then it becomes like really, really smooth, while the dog is animated frame by frame. But then I also moved the dog back and forth with transform keyframes. So then you get like a layered animation, which becomes really it looks really complex, but it's very simple to do. So in the end, like the craft matters, so you have to know what you're doing. So look at frame by frame or transform keyframes more like tools that you can apply, but you definitely need to know the underlying craft of it.
Yeah,
the thing is, because with frame by frame, the mesh is duplicated each time per frame, so
Yep.
it adds more file size. But if you use the
Definitely.
transform, it saves a lot on if you're trying to keep it optimized for Quest.
Yeah, it
Especially
does
for that.
matter. Like, it doesn't matter too much when the animation is not that long, but let's say you have a 5-minute animation, it's all frame by frame. It does matter. Like, then the file size can get super large. But then the drawback on using transform keyframes is that you might have to break it down in a lot of layers. So you have to keep track of how many draw calls you have, right? So it's always like a healthy balance between all those things, you know,
Yeah,
like,
balance.
yeah.
Yeah, if you remember my dinosaur transforming character, the especially the part that when he talks, that's a combination of transform keys, frame by frame, animation, all together combined in a seamless way. And that's kind of I was when I did that scene, my intention was to really take advantage of those techniques together. And that kind of is the power of Quill. I think it has that ability to combine these two things, like this awesome way to nest animations inside of other animations, and at the same time you're able to do the more traditional approach, which is kind of what I'm doing right now, just frame by frame keyframing, frame by frame in betweening, which gives you a more traditional feel to it, and also allows you to do animations where your character is distorting and changing shape. If you only animate with transform keys, your character will be really rigid all the time because you cannot animate transform keys with deformations. So yeah, like Goro says, just finding how those two techniques work and really figuring out what works best for your scene that you're trying to do, and combining the two things.
Sorry, my mic is acting weird because I'm on virtual desktop, but I had a question for you. So you could say the pros are of frame by frame is you get the subtlety and control. You have way fewer draw calls because everything's not layered.
Yes.
Yeah, but the bad thing is that you're duplicating geometry on every frame. If you
Right,
want,
so you get more geometry, but better quality animation.
totally, yeah.
Also, the frame rate issue is also a thing. Like you're going to get choppier animation because the interpolation is not as good as keyframe transform keys.
It's not it's not perfect automatic.
The interpolation, like I said, is relative, but as long as you're like on 24 frames per second, that's what you will get, right? If you would animate 90 frames per second, it will be butter smooth, but then you have to make sure that you, like, right now you see the red and blue shadows, but at 90 frames per second, you won't be able to almost see the difference between the previous frame and the next frame. And then it's gonna be like crazy to animate frame by frame. But it's more about like what your global frame rate is, and not about that it is frame by frame, right? So because you're basically, it's respecting the master timeline frame rate, the global frame rate.
The other thing is, sorry.
In terms of what you said, Mike, about like you get more quality animation, it really depends on what you do. You can do quality animation with transform keyframes. It really depends on how you break down your. It's just two different techniques. I wouldn't connect quality to it because.
Got you. I guess I meant quality in the sense that, like you were saying, if I wanted to get all of this detail Daniel's doing right now with transform keys, I would have to do so many layers, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Then I'm balancing that. So as long as I can balance the two, whatever it is, budget-wise, it should be a good decision to pick one or the other method.
Exactly. Yeah. Depending on your scene, you'll be the judge of what is best to use on each occasion, right?
Also,
So
one important thing to note is like, for example, if Daniel wants to like decides to colorize this guy after the fact, that's gonna be a big problem because each frame is its own layer. Of course, you could select each frame is its own geometry. So of course you can select certain parts over time. But for example, if I would ask Danielle to quickly select all the frames of the feet, that's going to be difficult, right?
Yeah.
So one big advantage of transform keyframes, if you, for example, have a car and it goes from point A to point B with just 2 keyframes, at any time you are able to just colorize the car, right? So I think
that
that's
totally
how you
makes
did it,
sense.
Mike, in your Lincoln piece.
That's right.
You
That's right.
animated most of the stuff in with
That was easy.
keyframes, right? So
Easy.
you can
Yeah.
it's non-destructive workflow. So at any time you can add stuff, you can
Mhm.
add accessories and recolor stuff without worrying about having to do it over a range.
Lots of them. Yeah, just doing it in 2 positions. Exactly. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So again, it really depends on what you want to do, right?
The other thing, it depends on what your final output is. So if you want to bring a Quill animation into a 3D program, Quill can't bring the transfer key animation in, but it can bring in the frame by frame animation.
Yeah, that's a really good
exporting
point.
as like an FBX or Alembic. Yeah, Alembic.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
If you want to render it in a 3D program.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great advantage of working this way, duplicating the geometry every frame, because that will be able to be exported in other software like Maya, Unity, or whatever you need, right? But if you use transform keys, unfortunately, there's no way to export that information to other packages. Is a transfer keys. It's a
there's a way, but it's painful. So
yeah, you may know more than me, of course.
Yeah, there's a way, but it's really painful.
There's a way, but I'm not allowed to talk about it.
I mean,
it involves Character Studio, or
you can literally do it right now, but I can just walk you through how you would do it. But so, for example, for cycle that is maybe 12 frames long, it's no problem. But if you have a cycle that's like 200 frames long, you might not want to do that. But the way you can do this is, let's say you have a cycle animated all with transform keyframes on like gajillions of layers. You can create a new layer, fill that up with 12 empty frames, and then you go to the first frame again. Then you turn on in the selection panel, you turn on select all, right? Select across frames.
Oh yeah, I know where you're going.
And then you lock all the layers that you don't want to select. And then you start selecting the whole frame, like all strokes that you want to merge. And then you paste it with the paste function that Danielle showed in the last lesson with the paste button, copy paste. You basically select all the strokes, go to frame 1 on the empty framed layer and paste it. Then you go to next frame. You select all again. Then you paste it again into that empty frame in the prepared layer, right? And then you do that 12 times, and then you have basically a merged layer with all the frames combined into all the layers combined into one. But there's a but, of course. Then it's all merged. So if you wanted to keep them separate, right, like keep the material separate, because if you want to shape them differently, like the legs differently from the feet, the body differently from the legs and stuff like that, then you would have to do the whole thing like a bunch of times. Like maybe like if you have like 20 layers,
12 times per layer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like 12 times per layer, which like get a script going or something.
But there's also a good thing if you have a colorized character and you want to use vertex color, then you can just do it in one go, right? If you don't mind having just one material for the whole character with vertex color, that is something you could do. But there's
totally. That makes sense too.
It's just super painful.
Yeah, I sorry, I didn't pay attention to that.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm in the focus zone right
Do
now.
your thing, man. Do your thing.
We're letting you focus.
But
And
it's all recorded, so I can rewatch it and I can hear what Gordo just said. But it
Nice.
sounds like it's complicated, right? Especially if you have a long scene.
It's simple. It's just tedious.
It's just tedious, yeah. Okay. I'm getting close. Just gonna. Yeah, this could be also tedious depending on how long is your scene. But it's fun. And it's more like that kind of work when you're doing traditional animation that is kind of slow, but it's also super fun to see the results later. And you will get more like a manual, like a handmade feel to your animation as opposed to something mechanic or automatically in between, right?
Yeah, I think
Daniel?
that's the beauty of this approach, that what you do directly translates to the virtual canvas versus like relying on Maya or the machine to interpolate for you. So this is like 100% you, and this is like what I like about this medium a lot.
Yeah,
Full control. Full control.
it feels like it's done by hand as opposed to very automated kind of process. So yeah, that's what I love about it too. Like it's completely imperfect. Like when I see it back now, when I play it back, oh yeah, there's imperfections here and there, but it feels like I made it. Like I feel like, oh, that's my little creation there, moving, And
it has a lot of character already.
exactly, there's something more special about it when you do it by hand. So it's like we said before, the advantages and the disadvantages of each technique, right? Um, okay, I think I have time to finish that, right? It's only one more step.
You have 15 minutes. 16.
How am I doing time wise?
Yeah, 16 minutes.
To
left.
finish the class?
Yeah.
Oh no, I wanted to talk about the arms and everything. Oh no, there's not gonna be time for that. That's okay. We'll do a very fast talk about follow through, and I'll do a fast, quick example, and that's it. But in terms of in betweening, nobody has more questions. It's very clear, right? It's very easy to understand.
Yeah, it's making sense to me. It's
And
really useful.
the one thing that I wanted to mention before is just be mindful of always that we're working on 3 dimensions, right? So you will see me turn like that constantly, and to check the trajectories, I'm gonna draw a line. If like this is the previous frame, this is the post frame, and this is the frame that I'm working on. So I'm trying to get that at least as close as possible to that path, try to avoid things like this, like this kind of, it can happen because if you're working here, sometimes you can accidentally move something forward without even noticing because you're moving on the 3rd dimension, right? And you turn around your camera, oh my god, it's an easy mistake to do. So just be mindful of that working on 3D animation when you're, if you come from a more 2D side of things, what am I doing here? I don't know. This is not done yet, right? Okay. Okay, I think I have time to finish it.
One of the problems that I find I get is I accidentally select the onion skinning when I'm moving, when I don't want to touch the onion skinning.
How can you do that? I mean, I cannot select the onion skin.
Maybe it's a bug, but I sometimes accidentally select the onion skinning.
No, what can happen is that you go to another frame. Like here, I have select on 27, and I go back to 26, but 27 is still selected and it's still movable. You can still move it. Hang on.
You got to let go of your selection or later, right?
No, it doesn't let me move it. Actually, it only moves what I have right now. Yeah. Does it do grab tool it? Oh yeah, grab tool does work on the frame that you're not on. So that's that can happen accidentally. You gotta be careful with that. So you have a selection on a frame that you're not on. So in 27 I have a selection. I'm on 26 right now, and I'm accidentally moving 27. So yeah, just gotta be mindful of that. Make sure that nothing is flashing if you don't really want to. Um, but yeah, what I do with the legs is just basically doing a quick selection, and that's important as well to build your characters so they're easily selected like that. Um, if you don't have that option to easily select something, I would recommend to maybe have the legs on a separate layer so they're easier to select in one easy stroke without accidentally selecting the body. So in this case, because this is one stroke and this is one stroke, if I start selecting like this, I have already all the leg. I don't need to start from here. I can
What
start.
if you had a separate layer for the body, but then had it locked, and then you turned on the I forget what the tool is, where you can select any layer at the same time.
Yeah, you could do that too, and you can turn off on and off the lock.
But then Entirely still would select the body. Never mind.
Yeah, exactly. But if you have a lock, it won't select the body. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can lock it and it won't select it.
Yeah, so you have to
I
constantly.
was going to ask you if when you did your remedy characters and your other characters, because I've seen how you construct them, do you use this principle of keeping the shapes so simple that you can easily select, or do you mostly use layers to make sure you keep things separate?
I had and I depending on the shot, there were shots where I had things on a separate layer to make it easier to select. And there were some shots where I didn't. Like for example, when she's kind of uh, pulling the arrow for the first time when she's shooting. And also, I have a video on YouTube about that. When she's shooting the arrow for the first time, that whole animation is in one layer, and I just
Interesting.
duplicated that same pose of her when she was like uh, kind of like that with the. So I just duplicated that layer many times, and I just used the grab tool to grab the. It was kind of easy to do this, and then the way it was constructed, the shoulder. If I selected the elbow, the arm was selected, and it didn't select automatically the chest. So so yeah, the way you're right. The way I constructed the characters also helped with the selection. So when you get an arm and you reach the elbow zone,
get the elbow. Yeah,
I would select also the rest of the arm and the shoulder because
that's
it was
cool.
all the elbow and the shoulder. It was all part of the same stroke. So that way I was able to do this kind of in betweens like that very quickly, and and then sometimes I will have that, and now I have all this duplication there. So maybe I will just use grab tool without any selection, and that gives you the option to move the whole body, right? So that I would do that a combination of these two things masked
Got it.
masked deformations with a selection and deformations without selection, which affect the whole body. So I would do a combination of these two things, and that will give you that a more complex kind of animation, instead of just moving the whole thing with like that, right?
Got it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really depended on the shot. On the last shot, when she cuts the strap at the very end, I did that by animating I in between things separately. So I only in between the torso first, and I did the whole thing just the torso, and then I did the whole thing just the hands, and I did the whole thing just with the head. You know what I mean? I did
I
that.
see. I see. Mm-hmm.
So in that doing it that way, it was so much easier to just select something and change it and in between it. And on another layer with transparency, I had the animation in rough, like really rough mode, like a sketchy.
Well, like the sketchy, like you showed it in that first pass, little drawing.
Yeah, yeah. So
Got
I
it.
had
Cool.
I
Cool.
had the animation already done in a very dirty way, rough way, and using that as a base, I used the clean models like that, and I started with one piece only, and then the other piece, etc., etc. So that way it was easier to select things.
Interesting.
Yeah. So each shot kind of I use different techniques to kind of make sure the selection is easier, because you're right. Yeah, it can be a really big problem in Quill to not being able to mask things. As you have to figure out ways to mask the selection that you're working on.
I think important to say here is like it's there's no wrong or right or one way or the other. Like there's like it really depends on the shot and what you want to do. You can have like super complex strokes and stuff if you want to keep it on layers and use the transform keyframes. And like if you do uh like a short experience or something in Quill, like it really like you're free to do whatever you want, right? Like you're not tied to the way the character is created. You can always duplicate the character, break it down in different ways for certain shots. And maybe for certain shots you will only use the face or only use the torso because everything else is like invisible.
Yeah.
So I think the cool thing is that there's no rig attached, there's no hierarchy attached
Yeah.
or something. You can do whatever you need to do
Yeah.
to sell your story. So try to. It's really easy to fall back into like the traditional workflow that you constrain yourself even if there's no constraints. So try to get used to the fact that there's like less constraints than in any other medium that was existing before. So you can just do whatever you want, and I think that's something that needs time to get used to, and also it needs time to figure out for yourself what the best workflows are. And for me, the best way to figure that out was just like busting out work and trying new things, and always like try new things that you haven't done before, and then you will find like the best workflows for yourself.
Really like this idea of the nesting, the by frame animation and then the keyframe in a layer, like their stuff, and mixing the two seems really unique. I think that sounds really fun.
Yeah. It opens the doors for a lot of possibilities.
I mean, you're kind of doing that already, Mike, anyway, right? Like with your winter piece and with Lincoln, you kind of have both.
Just started to barely, and it's great, but like now seeing all this detail, animation you can do in between, seems like, yeah, you could do a ton.
I actually had a question about kind of dialogue for this instance, and how Daniel, you created like a copy of your model in just had it off to the side and would duplicate it, would it be worth, if you wanted to do dialogue, to make a mouth shape library almost and have it off to the side if you want to do frame by frame?
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what I did with the dinosaur piece. I built the first mouse shapes, and because I knew I needed to reuse them later, I did the same trick as I did with the legs. Once I was done with the mouse shape, I put it here, and make sure it's visible in all frames, so I can just grab it whenever I need it. And yeah, just pretty much like when you like in stop motion, like you swap the one mouth with another, and the swap to make it more smooth, just add in betweens by distorting them with the grab tool, and that is what I use for that piece.
So I think the only difference was that he was building the library as he was animating, but it was basically a library,
Yeah,
so
it doesn't
yeah,
matter when you build it. Yeah, I mean you could build it before or during your. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
because what you don't want to have is that you put so much time in each shape and stuff and you don't end up using them, so it's more efficient, like, oh, I need like an O or something, and then you build it in that moment, just put it to the side,
Exactly. Yeah.
and then you get like a dynamic library where you don't lose work or waste time doing stuff that you might not need.
Yeah.
Because like if you do mouse shapes for one character, it doesn't mean that it will work for another, right? Unless you have always the same design for the character,
Exactly.
because it's not a rig. So rather than spending time on like carefully building a library, I think the dynamic way is the way to go, because then you can just always build the library and be 100% sure that you're gonna use those shapes.
Yes, that's the way I did it. Yeah, I build mouth shapes as I needed them. So yeah, and the way you animate, which I can do another Saturday. We can just do one little dialogue piece and then just talk about the process of how to
That would be
approach.
amazing.
Yeah, I think that would
That'd
be
be
a cool
great.
one too. But in this class, I wanted to really finish this a little bit, show you guys.
You have 2 minutes for the arms.
Will look like
Speed
one of
run.
my animations.
And almost there. Just make sure it's nice and just right in the middle there. And if it works perfectly in the first time, it's gonna be amazing. Ooh!
Nice.
Damn.
Boom.
Booyah!
Got
Let's go,
swagger. He's got some swagger.
Yeah, there's a couple of
Good attitude.
There's a couple of spacing problems right here. Like, click.
It's like Elsa from
Click.
Frozen right there.
Yeah. It's a little weird. Yeah, it's kind of wobbly a little bit, but it can all be fixed.
Can you show a little quick how you delete the legs at the top?
Oh yeah.
One of them's twitching.
Once you're done with this, obviously you have to delete the legs. So just select, make a sphere that covers both legs and hit play. Just gonna select everything, and then just hit the delete button, and that's it. You get rid of that library. So yeah, you can spot the mistakes right there, right? There's a pop here, very big one. So these are
Nice.
the kind of things that need to be fixed. Obviously, it wasn't
Actually,
easy.
it's really nice seeing you fix things because it's not obvious what is broken either.
Yeah, when you see it playback, you can feel the pops right there. That's like something that doesn't really quite.
And it's really important here also to look at it from multiple angles, like Daniel said before, because then you might see things like, you might see something as weird from the side, but then if you look at it from the front, you will notice, oh, that's why. Or if you look at it from the top, you might see that the body is moving like weird or something like that, you know. So take advantage that it's like of being the free camera, basically. Look around the animation from all angles and make sure that it looks good.
Yeah. So ideally, I would spend more time here on the front and try to fix all these problems, all this the knees wobbling too much. So I would try to fix that.
But if you can quickly show Daniel, instead of like doing the arms and then the last minute or something, or we're over. But to combine this now, the body movement, for example, adding like a follow through with the grab tool in real time. That is something I do sometimes where I do like frame by frame animation first, and then I add like a little bit of randomness on top of it, or like push like the rhythm with the grab tool. So for example, he could play back, use the grab tool, and add like body motion on top of it, you know, with the grab tool in real time, which is sometimes like really a really powerful way to make it even look more organic.
Oh, you mean puppeteering?
Just like
swagger.
just as
A
a
little bit, a
test,
little more.
just to show like the bounce, you know, like
Yeah, but that will create even more wobbly
it,
problems. So I wouldn't recommend doing that right now on this one because I feel like it's gonna. But I would do is so you say like without
I was just talking
just
about just
having
show that you
that
can
kind of
grab
stuff.
it and change it. Exactly.
Ooh.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
kind
can
of
like quickly do
strange.
something at the end, you know, like where you can change it with a grab tool over time, anything you animated frame by frame, and that could be like a powerful tool for your
Yeah,
animation.
like the whole thing, I can make it like that, and just hit play, and now the whole animation is off balance. I could do that if I wanted to. So that's a cool way to kind of modify the whole animation, even if it's frame by frame.
Undo that, I don't know what you just did.
Yes. So imagine I wanted him to lean forward during the whole thing. So this is the process. You have the grab tool. You set up your influence first. Make sure that's what you want. Let's say I wanted something like this, right? Okay. So I hold the left trigger. I mean, sorry, the right trigger to do grab tool, right? And I do the change that I want to do, and I keep holding that right trigger, huh? I never release it, and I hit play on the left hand. So hit play, boop, and I'm not moving any of my hands. I just keep it still. So that way I apply the transformation on the whole animation, which is really cool to be able to do that. So you can fix mistakes, so we can you can apply that change to the whole animation. Like it could be really really useful.
Gave him a whole new personality.
Exactly. Actually, I did like it, so I'm just gonna keep it. Actually,
I know you're sad that you didn't get to like the arms, but I really appreciate you just like going through every single frame because I feel like you can learn a lot just by seeing like every single bit of the process.
yeah, that's kind of the reason I started to do this streams. I really wanted to show my process to everybody. So let's have a look at how can we make this guy move forward actually. And I'm gonna actually, instead of that, I'm gonna make a group and put the walk inside of the group. And this is something that I try to do even if I don't need it to do it. You know what I mean? Because making that um, as a habit, it really saves you time in case you want to add something else to this animation. And it's going to be more clear once I do this. So I'm making a keyframe on the front frame number one. We're going to do a couple of seconds. And this guy is going to be Up, sorry. Took. Okay, one less repetitions. Oh no. How was the way to? Oh, maybe I have to. Oh no, sorry. Okay. So now it's cycling. Okay, now the whole animation is looping, right? And it's looping for real. It's not because I hit this button. It's because it's actually repeating and connecting with the next cycle. Okay, so now everything here is inside of this group. On the first frame, I create a keyframe here, and a couple of seconds later, he's gonna move forward. I don't know, just random 5 seconds, something like that. And then we can turn the gimbal on and move the layer with this, and just move the guy forward, right? Just how much he's going to move is going to depend on the steps, really. So now it's sliding a little bit.
Oh, nice.
It's sliding a little bit, so we can avoid the sliding by just going here. And I mean, the sliding also is a problem because I didn't look at the spacing here carefully. It should have been really, really even. The way
Well,
this.
also the sliding will be happening because one keyframe's interpolating at 90 frames per second, and then your
Oh yeah.
animation is 24. Right?
Yes.
So you won't get it like perfectly right, and then we are probably watching this at 30 frames per second. So you might get like a lot of frame drops.
Yeah, but you guys are being picky. This looks great.
It would work for background characters and stuff like that. Maybe not for a close-up shot.
Sure. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, like a one trick is like going back one frame and then going to the next frame and try to see, okay, that if the heel is here touching the line, on the next frame I want it to be more or less in the same spot. But it's sliding a little bit, so it's not going to be easy to fix this problem. But let's have a
Sorry,
look.
were you adding a transfer key or to fix that, or?
No, the transfer key. The transfer key is the same. I'm just modifying that transfer key. When I have it selected, I am able to modify the transform key, right? Because it becomes blue. So if I'm in frame number, which one is it? 23. I'm in 23, and now I'm in frame 24, right? When I move to that frame, the transform key gets selected automatically. So that means that I'm going to be able to modify it. So if I move the transform key here, it's not going to do anything. It's gonna move the. It's hard to explain. It means when there's no key selected, so none of the keys are blue right now. They're both white. So if I move this, what I'm doing is changing the whole translation.
Yeah, you just reset the origin of the entire animation.
So the whole walk cycle is going to be here now. It's going to be in that side. So I'm not animating. I'm not changing the keyframe. I'm just changing where everything is going to be, right? So I'm changing both keyframes in this case. But if a keyframe is blue, means it's selected, right? And now if I do this, it won't move this keyframe. It will only move this one. So now,
if you're not on a keyframe, it's basically you're moving the layer.
But what if you added another keyframe right before that last one to correct the step? Would it just look jittery, you think, or?
If I have another keyframe here, okay,
That's what I thought you were doing.
Now, if I have another keyframe here, and let's say I do this, right? And then let's not select anything right now. So now it's gonna do this line here, and it's gonna go here, right? It's doing this trajectory right now. So if I have nothing selected and I do move the layer, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna move the layer, but I'm not changing the animation. Does it make
But
sense?
you can't fix that. You can't fix the sliding by
No.
adding
I'm
another.
not. Yeah,
Got
I'm
it.
not.
Okay. Okay.
Also,
Yeah.
the sliding mic is not caused by it's caused by the frame
Yes.
like,
Yes. I see. I see.
discrepancy. So
Yeah.
no
Sure.
matter
Sure.
like
Sure.
what
Yeah,
you could do is like you animate it with step curves frame by frame. Then you will be able to probably, and then you do step curves for each frame. You choose a new
I see. I
position.
see.
I think it's
But,
good.
Sure. Sure.
It's gonna be super clear now. Actually, I forgot that we can do this. If you select all on the onion skinning, you're able to see your transform keyframes in action, right? So now I have no keyframe selected, and I move this. It moves the whole thing. Does it make sense? And
Oh,
then
that's nice. Yeah, that's cool. That's
and
a
then
good visualization.
if I do a new keyframe, I'm gonna change that, and I'm creating that new keyframe.
It's
Right.
awesome.
So it's important to know the difference between having the thing any keyframe selected or not. So if I don't have anything and I move, it's just moving the whole thing.
that's
Even-
why it's good what Danielle said before to get into the habit that if you use transform keyframes, you put it in a group. And
Put
stuff,
it, yeah,
then
put it
you
in a
can
group
always move it.
because you may need it for something later. So
And I usually put it in a group because basically I animate a group because what I can do is then I can put spawn areas in there, I can put new layers in there, and the animation will still work on that group. And then I put that group into another group where I can just adjust the global positioning of it. So it's like nested, like it's group, and then assets.
That's how I was managing to do the car, and it made it so easy to make adjustments. Little thing. Yeah.
So the other thing that you could do instead of creating new keyframes like that, you can also activate the record, right? If you activate record and you have nothing selected, what's going to happen is you're going to create a keyframe automatically when you move, as opposed to
Got it. Yeah. Wow.
exactly. If I don't have the record button on and I move, I'm going to move the whole thing. Makes sense, right? And if I have the record on and I do exactly the same action, it's going to create this new keyframe right there.
And that is great to visualize it like that.
So imagine I want this guy to walk on a curve. So now he's walking on a curve. And I have the auto key on, so I can just adjust the spacing there. And just kind of make sure that he's working on a path, right? And every time I move something, I'm creating a new keyframe. So you have to be careful as well. But being able to...
Oh, this is great. This makes sense. So if I wanted to make my car do a curve, like drive around a curve, this is how I would do it.
Yeah.
I would actually do it differently. I would move the pivot from the group. Is that what you did, Daniel? I would move the pivot of the group.
Yeah, that's the correct. Yeah, that's the correct way to do it. The what I'm doing now is not the right way to do a curve, but I just wanted to show you guys what happens. Whether
I feel like that's another lesson, actually.
Yeah, that will be another class, I think.
Transfer keys.
Using the transform keys properly, but yeah, because I'm able to see the spacing, I can change this and make it manual instead of the way the Goto says is the more proper way. But I'm making this like rough and dirty. But it could you can still make it work more or less, but it's not the perfect curve. So it's kind of yeah.
Looks like the typical game character animation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But to do a straight line walking, that's the right way to. Actually, it needs to be straight, and then next keyframe it's gonna be straight like that. Boop. So now he's walking on a straight line. It's sliding a little bit, but it doesn't matter because it's just the nature of this. I wish there was a way to change that. Actually, I wish there was a way to tell the transform keys to in between in 24 instead of 80 frames per second. So that way the frame by frame animation would match perfectly with the
So
transfer.
That's interesting.
so you can. So what you would do is like you it's interpolating for you right now, right? So you would basically select go frame by frame forward and set a keyframe in each frame.
Yeah.
And then you select everything and change it to stepped.
Yeah, no.
I've
You could do a keyframe in every frame, right?
I've had issues with that when you're having something outside of a linear curve, like if you're doing it with an ease in, ease out, or just either of them individually. I've noticed that like it doesn't keep it, like it tries to accommodate for the fact that you've got a frame closer to, I guess, its next destination. So if you've got a frame that's got an ease in or ease out curve on it, as it gets closer, it tries to shift where that's going.
Yeah, the interpolation here is not my favorite thing in this program. I'm kind of a struggle a lot to when I did the carriage in Remedy, when the carriage is kind of leaving the house and is moving toward the. I had such pain to get that working the way I wanted it because of the way the tangents are working. So yeah, I end up kind of doing linear, and I try to kind of manually animate that.
Yeah, important to note is the tangents are speed based. They're not position based. So it's not like the Maya graph editor tangents where you can change the position by changing the tangents. It's basically just speed. So linear is constant speed, and then like if you're familiar with After Effects, it's the exact same thing as ease in, ease out, and easy ease. So what it's doing is just slowing down or accelerating.
Yeah. So every time you put a keyframe, every time you get a keyframe, what it's doing is it's kind of making everything slow down in that keyframe, and then speeds up again and slows down again in the other keyframe, and then gets out of it in this mode right here. And that's not the way I expected to work. What I expected is to change the path but keep the spacing.
I see. That was confusing to me as well. I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, because let's say I want this to be the slowdown, so I want to ease out of it. But when I click on here, I'm expecting the spacing to ease in, to kind of slow down until it reaches the stop point, but it doesn't. It's slowing down here and here, so that's kind of it's not working the way I expected because I'm so used to Maya, the way the interpolation Maya works. So when I create a new keyframe, I want that to just be a change of path. I don't want it to be slow down and slow, Anyway, maybe they'll fix it someday. So for now, you can just try to do it manually, and but yeah, I think that's gonna be another complete different lesson, different class. So hey, we got this working. So there you go.
Thank you so much once
11,
again.
20.
20 minutes passed. Okay, so that's time to finish the recording. And thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked it. Let's just.
Thanks for setting this up.
Certainly did. Thank
Sounds
you
like you
for
did.
Thank you.
all the information. Very helpful.